Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's episode dives deep into one of the most emotional moments we've ever seen in the world of the Slaton sisters. If you thought you'd seen Tammy Slaton at her strongest, think again. Because behind her new confidence, her public smiles, and her stunning transformation lies a story that's raw, heartbreaking, and painfully human. Today we're talking about Tammy, her girlfriend Andrea, and the emotional storm that shook not only their bond, but Tammy's fragile heart. So grab a moment for yourself, because this one's not easy to hear. It all began quietly. No explosions, no public fights, no dramatic TV scenes at first. Tammy had been changing. Her weight loss journey had taken her through every shade of pain imaginable, but it had also gifted her a new kind of strength. After years of feeling trapped in her body and isolated by the walls she'd built to protect herself, she finally began letting people in again. And among the new faces that found their way into her life was Andrea. Andrea was different. She wasn't like the people who pitied Tammy, or those who tried to fix her for the cameras. Andrea saw Tammy's soul before she saw her size. To Tammy, that was everything. For the first time, she felt truly seen. Not as a patient, not as a project, but as a person worthy of love. Andrea brought laughter back into her days. The kind of laughter Tammy hadn't felt since childhood. She brought warmth, quiet understanding, and a spark that made Tammy believe she could finally have the kind of relationship she'd always dreamed about. But what started as healing soon turned heavy. Tammy's family had always been protective, especially Amy. After everything they'd survived together, from childhood trauma to public judgment to years of emotional strain, Amy had every reason to guard her sister's heart. But when Andrea came into the picture, something shifted. Amy didn't trust her, and neither did most of the Slaton family. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was fear, but Amy could sense a tension that Tammy, blinded by affection, couldn't see. The thing is, when you've spent years craving love, you'll ignore the warning signs that love might hurt you. Tammy did exactly that. She pushed her family's opinions aside and defended Andrea fiercely. Every time Amy raised a concern, Tammy's walls went up. It was like watching two parts of her heart go to war, her love for Andrea and her loyalty to her family. And somewhere in between, Tammy started losing herself again. Andrea at first seemed patient, but soon, cracks began to show. Subtle remarks, small arguments, moments where her affection turned cold without warning. Tammy tried to smooth it all over, tried to convince herself it was normal. She'd been told all her life that she was too much, too emotional, too demanding. So when Andrea grew distant, Tammy blamed herself. She started shrinking again, not in size but in spirit. Then came the night that changed everything. The family had gathered for what was supposed to be a peaceful evening. Tammy, hopeful as always, wanted Andrea to be part of it. She wanted her family to see what she saw, to understand that Andrea wasn't a threat but a blessing. But from the start, the air was thick with unease. The small talk felt forced, the smiles didn't reach their eyes, and Amy's patience was paper thin. It wasn't long before someone said something small, maybe even innocent, but it was enough to spark a flame. Andrea's tone changed. Her words turned sharp, and when Amy tried to step in, defending her sister, Andrea snapped. What came out of her mouth next wasn't just cruel, it was unforgettable. She said Tammy's family was holding her back, that they'd never see her as anything but a burden. And she turned to Tammy, right there in front of everyone, and told her she was wasting her life on people who didn't believe in her. For a moment, time froze. Tammy's face went pale, her body still. She didn't yell, didn't cry. She just stared like someone had just ripped the ground out from under her. Amy's eyes filled with tears, but there was anger there too. The room felt like it was collapsing in on itself. Andrea stormed out, and Tammy sat there in silence, surrounded by the people who loved her the most but couldn't protect her from this kind of pain. That night, Tammy didn't sleep. She kept replaying Andrea's words over and over until they carved themselves into her mind. She had opened herself up completely, allowed someone to see her scars, her fears, her hopes, and that person had used them against her. She thought she'd built a new version of herself strong enough to withstand heartbreak, but this was different. It wasn't just about losing love. It was about losing trust again. In the following days, the house was quiet. Amy tried to comfort her, but Tammy withdrew. Every call went unanswered, every text left unread. She told herself she was fine, that she didn't need anyone, but her silence said otherwise. It was as if she was grieving something bigger than Andrea. She was grieving the part of herself that still believed love could save her. Eventually, the internet found out. Photos of Tammy alone began circulating, and fans started speculating. Some sent her messages of love and support. Others criticized her for falling too fast. But no one really knew what was happening behind the scenes. No one knew how much Tammy had sacrificed to believe that this time would be different. And now, all of it had crumbled. In one rare moment of vulnerability, Tammy posted something that broke everyone's hearts. She didn't mention names, didn't give details. She simply wrote, "Sometimes the person you thought would heal you is the one who reminds you why you built walls in the first place." That single line told the entire story. The pain, the disappointment, the loneliness. It was all there, between the words. For weeks after, Tammy avoided talking about Andrea. She focused on her recovery, on therapy, on finding her own peace again. But those who truly know heartbreak could see it in her eyes. Even when she smiled for the cameras, even when she said she was doing fine, there was a flicker of sadness that never left. Tammy had always been the fighter of the family, but now she was fighting something far more personal. Herself. What made it even harder was that Andrea's family eventually spoke out. Not directly, but through whispers online, through indirect posts that only added fuel to the fire. It became clear that there was tension not just between Tammy and Andrea, but within Andrea's own circle. They didn't approve of Tammy either. They saw her as a complication, a headline, a distraction. And that realization crushed Tammy even more. She had been caught in a storm she didn't create, and yet she was the one drowning in it. Through it all, Amy stood by her side. Their bond, once fractured by disagreements and distance, began to heal again through shared pain. Amy didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't need to. She simply showed up, every day, reminding Tammy that no matter who came or left, family would always be her anchor. For Tammy, that meant everything. But even then, healing wasn't easy. There were moments when Tammy wanted to reach out to Andrea, to ask for closure, to understand why love had turned into something so bitter. Yet deep down, she knew some answers would never come. Sometimes people break your heart not because they want to, but because they don't know how to love you the way you need to be loved. And that truth, though painful, became the beginning of Tammy's next chapter. She started channeling her heartbreak into strength. She spoke openly about her emotions, about the difference between attention and affection, about learning to love herself without needing validation from anyone else. Fans who once pitied her began to admire her for her honesty. Tammy wasn't hiding behind a mask anymore. She was raw, real, and unfiltered. And while the internet buzzed with speculation about whether she and Andrea would ever reconcile, Tammy quietly focused on something bigger, becoming her own person again. Her story wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about finally understanding that the greatest love story she could ever have was the one she built with herself. The days that followed felt heavier than Tammy could have ever imagined. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quietest moments that hurt the most. The mornings when you wake up and instinctively reach for someone who isn't there. The evenings when your phone lights up and you pray it's their name on the screen, even though you know it won't be. Tammy lived in that silence for weeks, trying to find herself again in a world that suddenly felt colder. She started spending more time outside, away from the noise of social media and the weight of public opinion. For once, she didn't want to be Tammy from 1000 LB Sisters. She just wanted to be Tammy, the woman who could sit on her porch and feel the wind, who could exist without being judged or analyzed. There was something sacred in those quiet moments, something that reminded her she was still alive, still healing, still capable of peace. But healing isn't linear. There were nights she broke down crying, angry at herself for trusting too easily, for loving too deeply, for hoping too much. She'd stare at old pictures of her and Andrea, the smiles, the laughter, the promises, whispered between takes, and wonder where it all went wrong. Was it her fault? Did she expect too much? Or had she simply chosen someone who was never ready for her kind of love? The questions haunted her, circling her thoughts like vultures. cultures. Amy tried to help, but even she knew that this kind of pain had to be faced alone. There were only so many hugs, only so many "you'll be okays" that could ease a heart this heavy. Sometimes Amy would just sit beside her in silence, letting Tammy's tears fall freely. That silence, that presence, said more than any words ever could. It reminded Tammy that no matter how broken she felt, she wasn't truly alone. But just when she thought she was beginning to rebuild, the past found a way to crawl back in. Andrea reached out, not in a call or a heartfelt message, but in something far colder. A social media post. A photo with someone new. The caption was simple, almost careless, but to Tammy it was a dagger. "New beginnings," it read. Just 2 words, yet they carried the weight of a goodbye she never got. Tammy stared at it for a long time, her eyes burning. She didn't cry this time, she just felt empty. Everyone saw it. The internet did what it always does. Dissected, speculated, and turned her pain into entertainment. Fans began tagging Tammy, some trying to comfort her, others stirring the pot. "You deserve better, girl," one comment read. "She moved on already?" said another. The noise was deafening. And though Tammy tried to ignore it, every word sank a little deeper. But something changed inside her that day. She realized that her story didn't have to end in heartbreak. She could rewrite it, not by erasing the past, but by learning from it. That realization didn't come easily. It came through tears, through frustration, through long nights of questioning her worth. But slowly, it began to grow within her, that quiet belief that maybe she didn't need to be loved by someone else to feel whole. Tammy began journaling. At first it was messy, raw, full of anger and regret. She wrote letters she never sent, letters to Andrea, to her past self, to the little girl who once dreamed of being loved without conditions. Over time, those letters became softer. Less about pain, more about healing. Writing became her therapy. With every word, she peeled away another layer of her own wounds. Then something unexpected happened. She started getting messages from fans who were going through the same kind of heartbreak. They saw her strength and felt less alone. Tammy, who once felt like she had nothing left to give, realized that even her pain could help others heal. And for the first time in a long time, she felt purpose again. She began sharing small bits of her journey online, not dramatic posts or emotional outbursts, but quiet reflections. Things like, "Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking." Or, "Sometimes the hardest goodbye is the one you never got to say." Those words resonated. People flooded her comments with gratitude. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about connection. Meanwhile, behind the camera, Tammy was changing physically too. Her weight loss had continued, but now it wasn't about numbers or approval. It was about freedom. Freedom from the pain, from the fear, from the need to prove herself. She moved differently now. Her confidence wasn't loud. It was steady. The same woman who once couldn't see past her reflection was now beginning to see her own worth. Amy noticed it first. "You're smiling different," she said one morning. Tammy looked at her and laughed. "Maybe I finally like who I see," she replied. And in that simple exchange, years of pain began to dissolve. The sisters had fought, cried, and nearly lost each other, but love always pulled them back. They had survived too much to let anything or anyone break them again. Still, there were moments when Tammy's mind drifted back to Andrea. Not out of longing, but reflection. Sometimes she'd see something that reminded her of her, a song, a scent, a passing phrase, and she'd feel a tug at her chest. But instead of pain, there was gratitude. Because even though Andrea hurt her, she also taught her something important, that love isn't always about forever. Sometimes it's about learning what you deserve and refusing to settle for less. As the months passed, Tammy started stepping out more. She attended events, did interviews, and even started taking control of her own image. She wasn't hiding behind filters or TV edits anymore. What people saw was real. A woman who had lived through heartbreak, survived it, and was still standing strong. The world saw her transformation in photos, but the real change was happening inside. One night, during a quiet live stream, a fan asked her, "Do you miss her?" Tammy paused for a long moment. The chat froze in anticipation. Finally, she said softly, "I miss who I thought she was." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said publicly. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was powerful. Everyone watching could feel it. It wasn't bitterness, it was truth. In time, even the family began to see how much Tammy had grown. Amy admitted she was proud of her sister, not just for losing weight, but for finding herself again. Their relationship, once so strained, became stronger than ever. They began filming again with a different kind of energy, not just survival, but renewal. Tammy was finally living for herself, not for love, not for the cameras, but for the woman she was becoming. But of course, life had other plans. Just when things seemed peaceful, a new rumor started swirling online. Whispers that Andrea wanted to reconnect, that she regretted how things ended, that she'd been reaching out privately. Tammy saw the headlines but didn't react. Maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't. Either way, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't the same woman anymore. The Tammy who once begged for closure now understood that silence could be its own kind of peace. In one of her later interviews, Tammy said something that stuck with everyone who heard it. You can forgive someone without letting them back in. You can love someone and still walk away. That line went viral, not because it was shocking, but because it was real. It came from a place only someone who'd truly been broken could speak from. By now, Tammy had turned her pain into wisdom. She started advocating for mental health, talking openly about emotional abuse, self-worth, and self-acceptance. She wasn't just healing, she was helping others do the same. People began to see her not as a reality TV star, but as a survivor, a voice of resilience. And yet, behind all the strength, there was still tenderness. Tammy still had moments of vulnerability, quiet evenings when she'd sit with her thoughts, her heart still learning how to beat freely again. But this time the pain didn't control her. It reminded her she was alive, that she'd loved deeply, and that she had the courage to start over. Her story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about becoming the woman she was always meant to be. Strong, compassionate, and unafraid to love herself completely. And as her followers watched her glow in a way they'd never seen before, one thing was clear. Tammy Slaton wasn't broken anymore. She was reborn. The world noticed before Tammy did. Her story, once defined by pain and ridicule, was beginning to shift into something new, something powerful. It started with a single post, a simple mirror selfie where she smiled without hesitation, no filters, no angles, just her. Within hours, it spread like wildfire. The comments poured in, "You look amazing. I can't believe this is Tammy. She's glowing." But it wasn't the weight loss they were reacting to. It was the light in her eyes. That quiet kind of confidence you can't fake. The one that comes only after surviving storms that should have destroyed you. For Tammy, it felt strange at first. All her life, attention had meant judgment. Now it was admiration. But even that felt fragile. She didn't want to be seen just for her body. She wanted to be understood for her strength, her heart, her transformation inside and out. Yet every time she opened her phone, her name was trending again. Tammy Slaton's stunning transformation breaks the internet. It was everywhere. TLC producers reached out, wanting to capture it all. But Tammy hesitated. For years, the cameras had shown her worst moments, her breakdowns, her pain, her chaos. Did she really want to let them back in now, when she'd finally found peace? Amy, ever the optimist, told her it could help people. "Show them how far you've come," she said. "Show them you ain't who you used to be," so she agreed. But this time, she set the terms. No scripts, no staged drama. If they wanted her story, they'd have to take it as it was, honest, raw, and real. And when the crew arrived, they found a very different Tammy. Gone was the defeated woman gasping for air between sentences. In her place stood someone steady, calm, with a quiet smile, and eyes that had seen too much but still held light. When filming resumed, the contrast was striking. Viewers who had watched from the beginning were stunned. The woman who once needed help walking now stood tall, holding her head high. Every movement seemed intentional. Every word carried weight. But as the spotlight returned, so did the whispers. Some fans refused to believe the change was genuine. She's just doing it for attention. It's all filters. She'll gain it back. The internet, as always, couldn't just celebrate. It had to pick apart. Tammy saw the comments, and for a moment, that old ache returned. But this time, she didn't respond with anger. She simply posted a video, her voice soft but steady. "I used to care what y'all thought. Now I just care that I'm still here." That video went viral. It wasn't polished or loud. It was honest. And honesty in a world built on perfection is what made it powerful. A world built on perfection is what made it powerful. Behind the scenes, though, life wasn't as easy as it looked online. Fame had a way of reopening wounds she thought had healed. Andrea's name still floated in comment sections, fans speculating, gossip blogs twisting old photos into new rumors. Tammy ignored it. Or tried to. But sometimes the ghosts of old love find their way in through the smallest cracks. One night, while scrolling through her DMs, she saw a message request she didn't expect. It was from Andrea. Just seeing the name made her chest tighten. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. The message was short. "I saw your interview. You look happy. I'm proud of you, no apology. No explanation." Just that. Tammy didn't reply. Not because she was angry, but because she'd finally learned that not every message deserves a response. Sometimes silence is the only closure you need. She turned off her phone, exhaled, and smiled faintly. It didn't hurt the way she thought it would. Maybe that was healing, when the things that once broke you no longer held power. As filming continued, Tammy began to rediscover joy in small things. Painting, cooking healthy meals, designing more jewelry, taking walks. The world saw her sparkle, but she knew it came from the quiet work no one saw. The nights spent forgiving herself, the mornings spent choosing peace. Amy noticed the difference too. "You ain't just losing weight, girl," she teased one morning. "You're losing the stuff that held you down." Tammy laughed, nodding. "Yeah," she said softly, "and I ain't ever picking it back up." That laughter, that shared warmth, it was something fans had missed. The sisters were back to teasing, laughing, living. Their bond had been tested and nearly shattered, but this time it felt unbreakable. Tammy wasn't leaning on Amy anymore. She was walking beside her, equal, strong. As her jewelry business grew, Tammy began to get invitations, podcasts, interviews, fashion features. People wanted to talk to her, not just the show. And though she was nervous at first, she found her voice. In one interview, the host asked, "What's the biggest thing you've learned from all of this?" Tammy paused, thinking carefully. Then she said, "That sometimes you gotta lose everything to finally find yourself." That clip became one of her most shared moments. Fans clipped it, quoted it, stitched it on TikTok with emotional edits. It wasn't just her transformation they loved. It was her truth. She was proof that people could change, that even the most broken stories could find a new ending. But not everyone was cheering. A few tabloid headlines hinted that her jewelry business was failing, that she was out of touch with her audience. Others accused her of chasing fame. Tammy read those too, but this time she didn't crumble. Instead, she doubled down on her work. She released new pieces, each one with a story, a name, a piece of her heart. One bracelet, the Phoenix, became an instant bestseller. In the product description, she wrote, "This one's for anyone who thought they'd never rise again." Fans flooded her DMs, sharing their own stories of rebirth. Survivors of abuse, people recovering from addiction, those who had lost everything and still found light. Tammy spent nights reading them all, crying, smiling, realizing that maybe her purpose was bigger than she'd ever imagined. Still, fame is fickle. For every kind word, there was cruelty. One viral post mocked her for showing loose skin in a photo. Why'd she even post that? Someone wrote. Tammy saw it, closed the app, and sat in silence. Then she opened her notes app and wrote something that would soon become one of her most powerful posts. "This body lived through hell and came back. It's not perfect. It's proof." She posted it with no filter, no makeup, just truth. The internet exploded with support. People who had never even watched the show shared her post, calling her brave, calling her real. Tammy wasn't just transforming her life anymore. She was transforming how people saw beauty, pain, and strength. And in that rising light, something beautiful happened. For the first time in years, Tammy wasn't defined by her past. She wasn't just the girl who struggled, or the sister who fought, or the woman who loved and lost. She was the woman who endured, the one who didn't give up, even when everyone said she would. The cameras captured it all. The laughter, the quiet moments, the glances toward a future that finally felt hers. But off camera, away from the noise, Tammy began to write something new, a book. Not about fame or drama, but about healing, about the small, invisible steps that make you whole again. Every chapter she wrote was a piece of herself she had once lost. Every page was a promise that she'd never let the darkness win again. As she typed the final sentence one night, tears filled her eyes. She whispered to herself, "You did it. Not just the book, not just the weight loss. She meant all of it: surviving, healing, becoming. And though she didn't know what the next chapter would bring, she finally knew one thing with absolute certainty: she was ready for it. There are moments after heartbreak when the world seems to pause. When the noise fades and all that's left is the quiet sound of your own thoughts echoing back at you. That's where Tammy found herself in the months after Andrea was gone. The laughter in her house was replaced by silence, the glow from her phone replaced by unread messages and unspoken memories. And for the first time in a long time, she had to face herself, without distraction, without validation, without someone there to tell her she mattered. But sometimes, that silence is where the real healing begins. The cameras came back for another season, and Tammy had a choice. She could pretend everything was fine, smile for the fans, and bury the pain under scripted moments, or she could be real. This time she chose honesty. When producers asked how she was doing, she said, "I'm not okay, but I'm getting there." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't performative. It was just real. The audience saw a different Tammy, not the woman who lashed out in anger or hid behind sarcasm. This was someone learning to be gentle with herself again. Someone who didn't want pity, just understanding. Amy, always the protective sister, noticed it too. There were fewer fights, more calm conversations. They still had their differences, they always would, but something had shifted. Tammy wasn't reacting out of pain anymore. She was responding from a place of awareness. The weight loss, the fame, the heartbreak, it had all taught her something valuable. Peace doesn't come from people. It comes from within. Still, the world outside didn't stop watching. Social media buzzed with rumors about her love life, about whether she'd ever trust again. Some fans shipped her with new people, others told her to stay single forever. But Tammy didn't owe anyone a story. She was tired of her love life being a spectacle. What no one saw were the quiet nights when she'd sit on her porch, looking up at the stars, whispering little prayers of gratitude. Gratitude not for what she lost, but for what she survived. It was during one of those nights that she started journaling again, something she hadn't done since she was a teenager. At first, it was just fragments, thoughts, memories, bits of emotion she couldn't say out loud. Then it became something deeper. She began writing letters, not to Andrea, not to her fans, but to herself. "I'm proud of you," one entry said. "You've been through things that would have broken others. But here you are, still standing." That kind of self-talk was new to her. For years, her inner voice had been her worst critic. But now it was becoming her greatest ally. Amy started noticing the changes too. Tammy's laughter returned, soft, unforced, real. She'd cook with her sister again, help around the house, play with the kids. There was a lightness in her that hadn't been there for years. And it wasn't because of anyone else. It was because she had started to forgive herself. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't erase the past, but it changes how you carry it. And Tammy had been carrying guilt for years. Guilt for the fights, the pain, the mistakes. But she was learning that she didn't have to keep punishing herself for being human. One day during filming, a producer asked her, "If you could say one thing to the Tammy from a few years ago, what would it be?" She smiled, thought for a moment, and said, "I'd tell her she's enough. She doesn't have to earn love by suffering." That moment went viral. Fans from all over the world commented with love and support. Some said Tammy's words helped them see their own worth again. And for the first time, Tammy realized her story was bigger than her. She wasn't just surviving for herself anymore. She was showing others that healing was possible, even after the worst pain. But healing isn't a movie montage. It doesn't happen overnight. Some days were still hard. There were mornings she didn't want to get out of bed, moments she'd scroll through old photos and wonder how things went so wrong. But the difference now was that she didn't stay in those moments. She allowed herself to feel them, then moved forward. And then came something unexpected. Forgiveness. Not just for herself, but for Andrea. It didn't come easy. There was anger, resentment, sadness. But one evening, while talking with Amy, she said something that surprised even herself. Maybe she was broken too. It wasn't an excuse. It was empathy. Tammy realized that hurt people often hurt others, and while Andrea's actions left scars, they also forced Tammy to face wounds she'd ignored for years. And for that, in some strange way, she was thankful. She decided to write one final letter. To Andrea. Not to send, but to release. In it, she wrote, "You came into my life at a time when I didn't love myself. I thought your love would fix me, but losing you taught me that the love I needed was mine all along." After finishing it, she folded the paper, placed it in a small box, and let it go. Literally. She went outside, set it alight, and watched the ashes float into the night sky. It wasn't about revenge or closure, it was about peace. The next day, Tammy felt different. Lighter. She didn't talk about it publicly, but those close to her could see it. Her smile looked real again. Her voice sounded stronger. And then something beautiful happened. A fan messaged her on social media, a young woman who had gone through a painful breakup and said Tammy's story saved her. She said, "When you said you forgave her, it made me realize I could forgive myself too." Tammy replied simply, "You deserve peace." That exchange became the core of what Tammy wanted to do next, to use her story not for pity, but for power. She started doing small live streams where she talked openly about healing, confidence, and self-respect. They weren't scripted, they weren't about the show. They were just raw, honest moments. Fans started calling her Real Tammy, and she loved that. For once, her fame wasn't built on shock value. It was built on authenticity. Amy watched all of it with pride. She knew her sister had been through hell, and now she was finally walking toward light. They still bickered, of course. That would never change. But their bond was stronger than ever. There was understanding in their eyes now, not judgment. They had both learned that love between sisters isn't always perfect, but it's unconditional. Tammy's next chapter wasn't about romance. It was about purpose. She started speaking about mental health, self-worth, and the reality of transformation, not just the physical kind, but the emotional one. She began saying things like, "You can lose the weight and still feel heavy if you don't heal your heart." Those words resonated deeply with people who had followed her journey for years. She began collaborating with others who had faced similar struggles, doing interviews where she talked openly about body image, trauma, and resilience. Each time, her message was clear: don't wait for someone to save you. Be your own rescue. Through it all, Andrea's name rarely came up again. And when it did, Tammy didn't flinch. She could speak about it calmly, with acceptance. That's when she knew the healing was real. The show continued, but Tammy was different now, more grounded, more aware of who she was and what she wanted. She wasn't chasing approval anymore. She was living in truth. And that truth, messy and imperfect as it was, became her greatest strength. At the end of one filming day, as the crew packed up, Tammy looked at Amy and said, "You know, for the first time in forever, I'm proud of who I am." Amy smiled and replied, "You should be. You earned that." That night, Tammy posted a simple photo on Instagram. No filters, no makeup, just her face illuminated by soft light. The caption read, "Peace looks good on me." It broke the internet. Thousands of comments flooded in. People didn't just see a reality TV star anymore. They saw a survivor. A woman who had faced the world's cruelty and come out softer, stronger, and full of grace. And as Tammy scrolled through those messages, one caught her eye. It simply said, "Thank you for reminding me it's never too late to start over." She smiled, whispered to herself, "It really isn't," and turned off her phone. Outside, the night was calm. No noise, no drama, no heartbreak, just peace. When the cameras stopped rolling and the lights went down, Tammy would often sit quietly in her room, the hum of silence around her almost comforting. There was something sacred about those quiet hours. No scripts, no producers, no comments to read. Just her, breathing, living, existing. For years, she thought happiness would come from being seen, from fame, from followers, from love. But now she knew. The real peace came from being okay when no one was watching. That realization changed everything. She started doing things not for validation, but for joy. Simple things, morning walks, painting small canvases, making jewelry just for herself again. Her creations weren't for sale, not this time. They were personal. Little pieces of her healing stitched together with beads and light. She'd often hum softly as she worked, losing herself in rhythm, the clinking of charms like tiny reminders that she was still here, still building something beautiful out of what once broke her. One morning, Amy walked in while Tammy was stringing beads on a thread. She watched her sister's hands move carefully, eyes focused, a calm smile on her face. "You look happy," Amy said. Tammy glanced up, smiled, and replied, "I am." It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. For the first time in her adult life, Tammy wasn't chasing transformation, she was living it. Her weight loss journey had started as a battle for survival, but it had evolved into something much deeper. Now it was about self-respect, about honoring her body, her spirit, and her boundaries. She stopped comparing her progress to others. She stopped explaining herself to strangers. She simply lived, and in that simplicity, she found freedom. She started cooking again, not the way she used to, not for comfort, but for nourishment. She loved experimenting with new recipes, sharing them online, showing fans that change doesn't have to mean losing who you are. She'd laugh during her videos, joking about burning toast or dropping things, and fans adored it. It wasn't about perfection. It was about realness. Slowly, the internet began to see her not as the 1000 lb sister, but as Tammy, a woman who fought her demons and learned to love herself anyway. There were still challenges. Some days the comments got cruel again. Some days she'd see old clips of herself online and feel that familiar sting of shame. But instead of hiding, she faced it. "Yeah, that was me," she'd say during live streams. "But she's part of my story too. I can't hate her. She survived long enough to become me." Those words stuck with people. They weren't lines from a show. They were truth from someone who had finally stopped pretending. Her fans began calling her an inspiration, but Tammy always corrected them. "I'm not an inspiration," she'd say gently. "I'm proof that people can change if they want to. The work's hard, but it's worth it." Amy often said that this version of Tammy felt like the sister she always believed was still in there somewhere, kind, funny, protective, and real. They'd spend afternoons reminiscing about their childhood, laughing about old fights and talking about the future, and that future finally looked bright. TLC approached Tammy about doing a spin-off, a more personal documentary, not about weight loss, but about transformation. The network wanted her to tell her story her way, unfiltered. Tammy hesitated at first. She was scared of going back into that world of judgment. But then she thought about how many people out there were still struggling, still waiting for permission to change. So she said yes, but on her terms. Filming began in early 2026, and this time, Tammy was in control. No dramatized edits, no forced conflicts. Just her journey, raw and honest. The documentary showed her day-to-day life, creating jewelry, meditating, visiting schools to talk about body positivity, spending time with family. The tone was calm, almost poetic, with Tammy narrating her own story. Her voice, once shaky and defensive, now carried strength. "You don't have to stay broken," she said in one scene. "You just have to believe you're worth fixing." When it aired, the reaction was overwhelming. People from all over the world shared how Tammy's words helped them heal, from eating disorders, grief, or low self-worth. The woman who once struggled to breathe without oxygen was now giving others life through her message. And Tammy? She couldn't stop smiling. Not the camera smile, the kind that comes from knowing you've finally become who you were meant to be. In one of the final scenes, she revisited the rehab center where her transformation began. The halls looked smaller now, the rooms less intimidating. She met with one of her old counselors who hugged her tightly and said, "You did it, Tammy." Tammy smiled and replied, "No, I'm still doing it," because she knew healing wasn't a finish line. It was a choice she had to make every single day. After filming wrapped, Tammy decided to take a break from social media. She wanted quiet again, not out of isolation, but peace. She spent her days at home with family, gardening, journaling, sometimes disappearing for hours just to walk by herself. Those walks became sacred to her. Steps of gratitude, each one a reminder that life doesn't have to be perfect to be precious. Amy's kids adored her now more than ever. She was the fun aunt who brought snacks, told stories, and showed them how to make bracelets. They'd sit around her laughing and talking, and Tammy would just watch them. The innocence, the energy. And think about how far she'd come from the days when she couldn't even stand up on her own. There were still moments of sadness, especially when she thought about Andrea. But they weren't filled with anger anymore. Just a soft kind of acceptance, the kind that comes when you understand that some people come into your life not to stay, but to teach. She realized Andrea's chapter wasn't about loss. It was about awakening. That heartbreak had cracked her open just enough for the light to finally get in. Months later, Tammy returned to social media with a simple post, a photo of her hands holding a small piece of jewelry. A silver heart charm engraved with the word, "Rise." The caption read, "Sometimes you have to fall apart to remember you can rise again." It was shared millions of times. She didn't need a marketing campaign or celebrity endorsement. Her story was enough. In the following weeks, Tammy began receiving messages from producers, motivational speakers, even nonprofit organizations wanting to collaborate with her. But she didn't rush into anything. She'd learned the value of pacing herself, of not letting ambition turn into pressure. Instead, she chose projects that felt right, ones that aligned with who she had become, not who people wanted her to be. One day, while filming a follow-up episode for TLC, a producer asked her, "Do you ever miss the old Tammy?" She paused, smiled softly, and said, "Sometimes, but I think she'd be proud of me." That clip became the emotional centerpiece of the entire special. As 2026 drew to a close, Tammy celebrated quietly at home. Amy brought over food, the kids decorated the house, and Chris made his usual corny jokes. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real. Family, laughter, love, everything she'd been chasing right there in her living room. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Tammy stepped outside. The air was cool and the sky was clear. She looked up at the stars, her breath visible in the moonlight. And she whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't directed at anyone in particular. Maybe to life, maybe to God, maybe just to herself. But it was real. Gratitude for every mistake, every heartbreak, every scar that led her here. Because now, Tammy understood something she never had before, that transformation isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you to hate yourself, and for the first time, she loved that woman. Fully, deeply, completely. The Tammy who once doubted everything now stood tall, grounded in truth. She didn't need validation, applause, or approval. Her worth wasn't measured by a number on a scale or a comment on a post. It lived in her laughter, her strength, her peace. And as she stood there under the quiet night sky, she realized this was it. Not the end, but the beginning. A beginning built not on fame or transformation, but on self-love. The kind that can't be bought, broken, or taken away. So when fans asked her months later, "What's next for Tammy Slaton?" she smiled and said, "Just living." And loving every bit of it. Because after all the pain, the fame, the heartbreak, and the healing, Tammy finally found what she'd been searching for all along, herself.